something that's like directly research, like if a person goes out into the field and does the research and then writes like a journal about it or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So the person who writes the article is the same person who collected data on whatever topic is being addressed. So they are actually presenting their original data on that topic. That's what makes a primary source. So that's what we're looking for. We don't want news articles. We don't want, magazines. We don't want online resources. Even things like, .gov resources or anything, .org organizations. These are good secondary sources. They're good places to potentially find primary sources, but they are usually reporting on someone else's data. So you want to actually go find the original data yourself. The reason for this, I mean, this is a very difficult skill. What you usually encounter when you're browsing, when you're browsing social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and you come across a news article talking about something, it's usually a second-hand account. It's someone writing up a summary of what the data are, or what the primary event is. But you're here because you want to practice actually having that hands-on, okay, interpreting the data for yourself. That's what I want you to do. I want you to actually get your hands dirty. I want you to, these primary articles, if you find one and you find it difficult to read, difficult to interpret and understand, you've probably found a primary source, because it takes practice to interpret these things. They're usually in a very particular format. And for psychological research, that'll be APA format. So I want to just go through how to find these primary sources. Honestly, the best resource is going to be Google Scholar. I don't know if many of you have used Google Scholar. I think it's becoming more popular. People are recommending it, and I think other professors at USC Salt are starting to recommend it more. It's catching on, just generally. It's a very good database. It uses the Google database, the Google search engine, which is just super refined. But what it does is when you search for something in Google Scholar, rather than it giving you potential secondary sources, it will almost always give you an original peer-reviewed journal article. Now, whether it's a primary source, you still have to figure that out, but you're at least going to get something that has been peer-reviewed, usually, or published in a handbook, which tends to be still quite rigorous, not as rigorous as peer review, but generally you're going to find higher quality original sources. So let's look at this real quick. If Google Scholar is pretty easy to find. I mean, if you type google.com/scholar, you'll find it. So let me show you this. All right, so this is Google Scholar. And for the most part, you're going to be wanting to keep things on articles. People who do law searches, so lawyers and such, who want to actually look at like case studies and case law and stuff like that. There's an option for that. Actually, that looks new. I don't think I've seen that before. But you can actually you can really just type whatever topic you're interested in. So I don't know. Someone throw out something. One of your topics that you want to look into. We'll just start looking for articles that way. Who wants to throw out their subject?
Mine was about, what is it? It was like why gay men were treated differently than lesbians.
Yeah, okay, good. Yes, I like that one. So the hardest part about using a search engine like this is usually just finding the search terms. So if we're looking for that, terms, I would suggest stigma is a big word in this kind of research. So stigma against, I actually do a lot of work on stigma against CNM, consensual non-monogamy. So that's why that's popping up. But stigma against, and it'll usually pre-fill a few things. We're not really getting what we need here. So this would be something like often a term used for anyone who is gay, LGBTQ. I mean, you could search for LGBTQ, and you'd get quite a bit here. So stigma and suicide risk among LGBTQ populations. You'll find these articles, and it'll give you the title. It'll give you the list of authors. All of this is information you're going to need. It'll give you the journal name. It'll give you the year that it was published. Eventually, you're going to have to cite these studies. The other thing that Google Scholar does that makes your life a lot easier, but not perfectly easy, is that if you click right here, say you really like this article, this is an article that you're going to end up wanting to cite. You can click this right here, and it'll give you all the different ways to cite this thing. We are going to use APA style. So generally, you can trust what Google Scholar does here. This looks correct. Actually, this looks very well formatted, but it's not always the case. What you need to do is if you go into the term paper outline where I describe term paper assignment number 3, I give you a link to resources that you can use for making sure that your reference section is in APA format. I am a stickler about formatting. I'm not a stickler about a lot of things when it comes to submitting certain grammatical problems. I care more about content mostly. But when it comes to references, I'm a big stickler about this. This is important to include all the information and to include it in the right format. So please be careful about this. You can just copy and paste this, but then revise it. Make sure that everything is as it should be. So if we want this article, what we can do is we have a few options. We can actually click on the link itself, and what this will do is usually bring you to the journal page. Now this is useful for a number of reasons. One, you get the title, which is what you're going to need for APA format. You need the author list. You also need the journal name, which is up here, the full name. You're going to need the volume number, which is right here, the year it was published. And then you'll also need the page range, which is right here. Sometimes you got to hunt these things down, but make sure that you visit these pages, get the right information, make sure that it matches the reference correctly. So you'll get on this page usually an abstract. That's fine, but what you're looking for is you're looking for the article itself. Sometimes there's a button right here that says PDF. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, good. Remember that this is recorded, so if there's anything that you kind of miss, this is all being recorded. I'll upload this right after class, Gonzalo. If you look right here, you click PDF. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough, it will just load up the PDF. Hopefully it did, but it opened it in a different window, so I'm going to have to. Okay, and this is what it'll look like. You'll get this PDF. Now, more and more scientific articles are becoming what's called open sourced, open access. And so what that means is there won't be a paywall. You won't, if you click on that link, sometimes what you'll get is it'll take you to another page that says, hey, pay $40 and you'll get access to this article. If you get that, you never have to pay for anything. Do not spend money on articles in this class. Don't spend money on articles in any of your classes. For the most part, you're going to find that the PDF is available. If it's not, I'll show you some tricks for getting around that, but never pay money. So you're looking at this and you think, okay, this is a really great article. How do you figure out whether this is a primary source? Well, if you scroll down, in APA format, you're usually going to have an introduction, which introduces the topic, of course, and then a primary source is almost always, I would say 99.9% of the time, is going to have a methods section. If it has a methods section, you can be pretty sure that it's a primary source, because when you collect original data, you actually have to report how you collected that data. What exactly did you do? What measures did you administer? How did you recruit participants? How did you organize and analyze your data? So if it has a methods section, it's probably a primary source. That is going to be, again, 99.9% of the time, you can rely on that. So what I would do is, if you are not used to reading primary sources, For the summaries, you will be asked to summarize the method, so you'll have to read this to some degree. As you scroll down, it'll describe the measures that they used, how they operationalized different measures, so how exactly they measured things like depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms, suicide-related behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. Then it'll get to statistical analyses. Now, unless you've had a class on statistics, I don't expect many of you to have an easy time interpreting this section. A hint, a nice skip, is often what you can do is you can skip right past the results section where they present the analyses for their data and go to the discussion. Often what authors will do is they will take their results and they will essentially restate them in a much more layman's way, so in a non-statistical way. They'll just give you the results. Now, if you are a scientist and you are reviewing this article, you need to go in and make sure that the stats are right. But as students, I think it would be okay if you kind of at least first skip to the discussion section, read what they've written here, get an idea of what their results were. Then if you have some questions, go back and be like, wait, how exactly did they find this? What did they do? What analyses did they run? But go to the discussion first. Part of being able to read these primary sources is knowing where to skip, where to like look first and then work your way backwards. I would say read the introduction, then skip to the discussion, figure out what they found. Then once you're familiar with what they found, then go back and start reading the method and start to understand how exactly they found what they say they found. So this is how you would access an article. This is a good primary source. Great. So you could cite this, and this would count towards the 10 primary sources that you eventually need. Now, for assignment 3A, the first one of the series, you only need 3 primary sources. I want to make sure that before you do all 10, you're on the right track, that you're writing the summaries correctly, that you're actually finding primary sources, etc. So these are what you're looking for. You need 3 of them. All right. I said that if you have trouble accessing the article, there are ways around it. Let's say that you get to this page and you're looking at it and you go, oh wow, look at this article right here. Let's click on this. We'll open this up. You're like, okay, it's got all the information, great, but wait, where's that PDF button? It says get access. If you click this, it's usually going to say you need to purchase it for some money. All right, if you get that, what I would first do is go back, look at the entry, and look directly to the right of it. If the authors have uploaded their personal copy on like a repository or their personal website, it will often pop up right here. That's what you're getting over here, up here. So for this article, you could potentially access the article through the journal's website, but if you can't, if you just click on this button right here, boom, it takes you straight to the PDF. What if you don't have that though? What if this is just blank over here? We have at the university something called interlibrary loan. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Okay. If you look at interlibrary loan, so this is on the USC Salkehatchie website. If you search USC Salkehatchie interlibrary loan, you'll get this page. Depending on which campus you're on, it doesn't really matter too much because they're going to deliver this electronically, but you can request it through one of the libraries, and we'll just, for the sake of ease, we'll say we're going to go to the East Campus. It'll ask you to log in with your user ID. And once you log in, you should be confronted with eventually something that looks like this. This looks very boring and kind of intimidating, all you need is you need this button right here, photocopy. If you click on this button, it'll ask for a bunch of information about the article that you're requesting. The title of the journal, the year it was published, the page range, and then the title of the article itself. These two things are separate. Remember, there's a journal title, such as the Journal of whatever this was. That would be the Journal of Gay and Lesbian Mental Health, versus the article title would be Stigma and Suicide Risk Among LGBTQ Populations. You put that information in, it asks for a wanted by date. What I would do is just say you want this right away. If you put today's date, they'll usually go, oh, okay, this is someone who needs this really quickly. They'll get it to you fairly quickly. The library staff here actually tends to be quite good. Every time I've worked at other institutions, kind of even bigger institutions, making interlibrary loan requests, and because they often might get a lot of requests, they're pretty slow about it. Here, though, they're really good. So if you're missing an article and you need it, say within a couple of days, you can usually rely on them to get it to you. They're very prompt. So this is a resource for you. Once you fill out this information, you hit submit request, and then it will show up under this main menu, I believe, wherever the default, yeah, right here, outstanding requests. It'll show, okay, you've requested this article. Now you need, it'll give you updates and stuff. And when they actually have the article, they'll email you directly. So you'll know when they finally have it. That's how you get an article that you can't get access to otherwise. This is slower. It's slower than if you simply access the PDF copy. So try to hunt these down first through Google Scholar, through these, through like original. You can even sometimes go to a researcher's homepage. If you search for the researcher themselves and you find their personal webpage, they might have uploaded the PDF to that page, even though it's not showing up in Google Scholar. That's another way to find these articles. Okay. Questions about finding primary sources. Has this been helpful? Okay. Okay. Well, that's my advice for you. So again, by next week is when term paper assignment number 3A is due. Find those 3 articles. You have to write up summaries. Make sure you follow the term paper outline. The closer you get these to perfect the first time, the easier it's going to be. Make sure you're practicing it right the first time. But I'll give you feedback. Then the following assignment that will be due will be the full 10. So you'll have a week to find 3. You're going to have a little bit longer to find all 10. This can be a very time-consuming process to find a good article and to write up a good summary. So give yourself this time. Don't put this off until the last second. I assure you, it'll be much easier if you kind of keep pace with this, all right? Also, if anyone ever falls behind in this class, it's at this stage. It's very uncomfortable to do this kind of research. People put it off and they don't want to do it, and this is where remember those term paper assignments, they just keep on snowballing. They just keep on coming. So keep pace with this, turn everything in on time. I set aside time to grade these right away. So if you submit them late, sometimes you'll get my grading late because I didn't plan to receive it, say, 5 days after it was due. So please, again, keep on time, keep on pace. But if you have any problems, if you have any questions, you're having trouble finding articles, I'm happy to help you. Just let me know, okay? I can help you brainstorm key terms to search for in Google Scholar, etc. All right. Any other concerns with this before we move on? All right, cool. All right. Well, then let's move on to the content. So how was everyone's experience of this past week's content? So we talked about, we started to get into the physical characteristics of female typical individuals, women, right? So what questions do you have for me?
Mine was what benefits like for I guess a species like does that species gain from sperm and eggs having almost like a not like just being more picky about certain sperm and certain eggs fertilizing getting fertilized, sorry.
Yeah, so kind of referencing the Fitzpatrick article.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So that's a great question. What'd you all think of that article, the Fitzpatrick article? Is it something that you'd ever considered before? That eggs might actually, to some degree, be selecting sperm?
I didn't know that was like a thing until I read the article.
Why would it be a thing? Based on what we've learned about evolution, why would that be a thing?
To help maybe get rid of some of the bad sperm that could have been potential bad options.
Okay, so if when we're talking about evolution, and we're talking about natural selection, ideally, what our bodies have been designed to do, our sexual behaviors, our sexual mind, our preferences, what they are generally designed to do is to get us to reproduce with certain individuals that are likely to increase the chance that our offspring will survive. Remember that kind of the goal of kind of evolution and natural selection is to, so really the goal is to make sure that that if you're going to reproduce, that's not going to be wasted effort, that the offspring have the best chance of survival, and therefore the genes have the best chance of being passed on into the next generation, and then into the next generation, and then into the next generation. So yes, to some degree, these properties of egg, where they have these what are called chemoattractants, that is, there are certain chemicals that the egg will be more likely to be compatible with, and therefore the sperm will have an easier time fertilizing an egg than other sperm, could be a mechanism by which certain traits of a sperm, and therefore the traits that the sperm are carrying, are selected for by the egg. I mean, this is kind of analogous to how we might select a partner kind of on the macroscopic level. So sperm and egg, that's microscopic, right? A macroscopic would be, you're just going on a date and you're trying to choose who you're going to date, who you're going to spend time with, who you have sex with, who you get married to. Well, the argument is, to some degree, at the microscopic level, eggs might be making those same kinds of decisions. And it's important, I think, that it's the egg, because again, women compared to men have to make a much greater minimum investment in offspring than men do. So it should be important for women and for women's physiology to be a little bit more selective. What was that idea again? That because women have to invest more in offspring, they generally should be more selective about with whom they reproduce? What was that idea called?
Investment theory.
Right, parental investment theory. That is based on how much men and women typically have to invest, at minimum have to invest. We would expect some aspects of men's and women's psychology to differ because of that. And so yes, here, to some degree, that seems to be reflected in our gametes, in our reproductive cells. Okay, does that make sense? Now, for those of you who are biologically inclined, who just really like biology, it's probably strange to hear that, okay, eggs can choose certain sperm. Because at a certain level, it's not like the eggs are actually conscious, right? They don't have a nervous system. They're not making decisions. But this is more about a matter of compatibility. And there actually is, if you look into literature on, so I want to give some background for why I happen to know something about this. When I was getting my PhD, and this is applicable to other parts of the chapter too, when I was getting my PhD, I was actually part of a lab that was examining the influence of women's menstrual cycles and aspects of the menstrual cycle that influence their sexuality, how they think about their romantic preferences, how they think about romantic partners at different times in the menstrual cycle. And so the idea there is that it's not that, say, the menstrual cycle or an egg is controlling how women, say, think about their mate preferences, but rather that to the degree that our biology can kind of push us one way in terms of our preferences, push us one way or another, it can very subtly influence how we make decisions. So I happen to also, along with that lab, there was also a lab that looked at what's something called sperm competition, and that's the idea that sperm, so if you have different men who within a short period of time have sex with the same woman, the sperm from both of those men are to some degree going to be competing to fertilize the woman's egg. Because at any given time, a woman can only be pregnant with one zygote, one kind of single-celled fertilized egg. So the idea is there may be these microscopic kind of dynamics between sperm of different men whereby they compete to fertilize an egg. This is well documented in non-humans. So you see this in chimpanzees, you see this in certain types of insects, you see this in certain rodents, small rodents, small mammals. In humans, the research is a little weird, whereby some labs have found that there is something like sperm competition for humans. So they've actually done studies where they'll take the ejaculate. I've actually done this. I've done this kind of research at the sperm lab, where you take ejaculates of different men, you try to get them as fresh as you can, and then you actually mix them together and to observe which sperm are likely to survive that mixing process, and therefore which kind of win out within that competition. The lab that I worked at, they did this work, they did some analyses, and ultimately a lot of the hypotheses that they had about sperm competition were not supported. So the data didn't really support sperm competition in humans, at least within our lab, but there are other labs that say they have. So when it comes to these kind of microscopic, competitive kind of dynamics with it, between sperm and between egg and sperm, I think that this is a really emerging area of research. The science is not settled here. And this is, I would say, one of the probably better done studies on at least between kind of eggs choosing certain types of sperm. But it's really in its infancy. And so I presented this art. I wanted to give you guys this article just to let you know that this kind of stuff does exist. And it's in some ways at the forefront of research, especially when it comes to fertility. What we find with fertility is that some couples, even though individually they don't have any fertility problem. That is, the woman is releasing eggs. The eggs are making, their way to where they need to be within the body. Men are producing sperm. There's plenty of sperm. Even if everything is working fine, that pair, that couple together, might actually have a very difficult time conceiving a child. And the idea is that this might actually contribute to those fertility issues, whereby everything's working fine. It's just that there's something about the chemical makeup of the woman's egg or the man's sperm such that they're not super compatible, that maybe the egg is really not choosing those sperm to be fertilized by. And that could lead to fertility issues. All right, so I've just dumped a bunch of information on you. I wanted to set the stage, but any reactions to anything I've just said about fertility, about sperm competition, this cryptic female egg choice, etc.?
I just want to say that before looking at all this and the article, you would think that normally without studying it, you would think that sperm is the same, and the egg doesn't exactly choose. I want to say, I mean, because to me it was mind blowing. I was just like, what? I thought they all do the same thing.
Yeah, you think, just everyone's kind of a standard, okay, everyone's got eggs, everyone's got sperm, right? But no, I mean, there's so much individually that varies about each of us. I don't think it's surprising to think that our gametes, our reproductive cells, our eggs and our sperm are individualized too, right? That we kind of have unique eggs, unique sperm. It's when you really think about it and you apply it to other things that you know about in life, it's like, well, of course they would be, right?
Right.
When it comes to the sperm, would two sperms be able to fertilize one egg? And would that be an issue?
So there's actually a design, and we'll go over this when we get to fertility. There's actually a mechanism in place that prevents that. What that's called is polyspermy. And so that's multiple sperm fertilizing the same egg. That is protected against. And so it shouldn't happen. It's unlikely to happen. However, it can happen. There can be there can be flukes where, just by chance that accidentally happens. When that does happen, yes, it's a problem. Because how it works is a sperm is going to contain essentially half of an individual's genetic code, and then the egg will contain the other half of that genetic code. So the idea is you combine sperm and egg and you get a full set of that code. Well, if two sperm are going to fertilize the same egg, then what you're doing is you're getting a whole other half of the copy of the genetic code. And the cell is not prepared to do that. So usually when polyspermy does occur, that resulting zygote, as it's called, that single-celled organism that is the combination of the egg and sperm, will not be viable. It might try to it'll split itself in half and reproduce and get bigger and try to turn into an embryo, but usually at some point it'll become unstable and it won't be viable anymore. It'll die off. So yes, there are things that protect against that, and it's bad when it happens. Yeah, unlikely to happen, but it does.
Going back to her question that she just asked, so does that mean it's impossible for a child to be birthed from that situation, or is it possible?
I'm not sure whether there's any documented case. My intuition is, I'll say that I don't exactly know, but if there's ever been the case, but I would say the vast majority of times, no. I don't think I've heard of a case of that happening. There are situations where an individual can inherit an extra, say, chromosome. This is what you get with Down syndrome, trisomy 21, where you have an extra 21st chromosome. And what that leads to often is certain physical and kind of intellectually developmental abnormalities, kind of the flattened face, the eyes that are wider apart, some of the intellectual difficulties. And so when you have extra genetic stuff within your cells, it is possible to live a fully functioning, normal, completely healthy life. It's just that when you actually get another sperm, what you're doing is you're inheriting an entire half of the genetic code. Really, it's a full set, because we have essentially 2 copies of the same code. So you're getting a whole other kind of copy of the genetic code, and eventually the body just kind of doesn't know which one to read, or it might read the genetic code multiple times when it should only be reading it once. And it almost always, from what I'm aware, it pretty consistently will not be viable. But individually with some chromosomes that can be possible. Some other examples are you can actually inherit more than 2 sex chromosomes. So it is possible, most individuals inherit XX or XY. You can get XXY, you can get XYY, which can, I guess the only way you would get XYY is through having 2 sperm. Although actually I think what happens there is you have 1 sperm, but as the sperm was being produced, it may have copied that Y chromosome, and so you have an extra one in there. It's not that there are 2 sperm. There are XXX, there's only 1 X, so you can kind of be missing or have genetic material, but you can't have that much. The more you add, the more complications you introduce. Yeah.
This might be like kind of like off topic, but in my head I think it's like on topic. So whenever you're explaining like the X, XY and stuff like that, so it popped up in my head about like transgender. So like I understand like you're born with X, Y, like whatever that, but why, like, is it more of like a mental process? Because I don't know why, but someone was having a conversation about it recently, and they were saying it's represented as a mental illness. So is it just like a brain deficiency, or like something that like triggers it?
It's not a deficiency often. We're going to talk about this in much more detail when we get to sexual development. So I'll try to keep this brief, just because we'll eventually get into a very thorough discussion of this. But the basic idea is XX and XY do not 100% determine how your body ends up developing. Your DNA is a blueprint. It's going to code for a number of things. So someone who inherits XX chromosomes, they have the blueprints for developing a female typical body. And that includes a female typical mind and brain. XY, male typical. However, there are many steps along the way throughout development where something can not develop in a way that is necessarily consistent with your chromosomes. For example, there are cases, there's something called androgen insensitivity syndrome, which we'll talk about, which is that you have XY chromosomes. So chromosomally, you are set up to develop as a male. However, you might be missing in AIS, an androgen insensitivity syndrome, what you're missing are receptors for a particular hormone that is responsible for helping you develop male typical genitalia and other male typical traits. So androgens are testosterone. That's kind of the hormone that helps develop male typical traits. So these are individuals who are insensitive to androgens. They're insensitive to testosterone. So their body is creating testosterone. It's just that the body doesn't recognize that the testosterone is there. So when they start developing as a child, and then when they go through puberty, what they do is they actually develop female typical traits. Because to develop male typical, the default, again, we're kind of getting into the weeds because there's a lot of information here, but the default is everyone develops female typical traits. And it's only if you're exposed to testosterone that you end up developing male typical traits. So if your body doesn't recognize that testosterone, you are going to go on that default path of developing a vulva and, with the case of AIS, it turns out they actually don't have an internal reproductive tract, so they don't have a vaginal canal, and they don't have kind of the male equipment either. Again, we'll get into that. So the best way to understand, I think, trans individuals is that throughout development, there are many different directions you can take. And so early on, they may have certain chromosomes, but then maybe their gonads are not quite, the gonads don't match what the chromosomes are coding for. So the gonads would be things like your testes or your ovaries. Or it could be the internal reproductive tract does not quite match your gonads or does not quite match your chromosomes. Or it could be that the traits you develop during puberty, things like breasts and facial hair and the deepening of the voice, things like that, don't necessarily match your chromosomes or your gonads or the internal reproductive tract or your external genitalia, the penis and vulva. So what happens is there's a mismatch for one reason or another between kind of these different sets of traits that within someone who is cisgendered, that is someone who has, say XY chromosomes, they develop a penis, they have testes, etc. All these things cluster together. For someone who's trans, they may not perfectly cluster together. Now, when it comes to, I think, what you're referring to in terms of kind of psychological characteristics, our brain is something that is differentiated between men and women. There are differences in how men's and women's brains develop to some degree. So I think one of the things that, again, there is research on this, but I think as trans people become more recognized within popular culture, and I think they already are, and I think to some degree they're going to be represented more in science, I think we're going to have a better understanding of how a person's brain, as something separate from chromosomes, gonads, etc., can develop differently than how the body develops, that the rest of the body develops. And so you can have a mismatch between how aspects of the brain develop, and part of the brain might be your identity and how you express yourself to other people, and how your body develops. So there's a mismatch there. I would not go as far as to say that it's disordered, because what we find is that trans individuals actually exist cross-culturally. You see them in pretty much every society, and in many societies they're actually accepted, and if they're integrated into society, that is, they're accepted as either a third gender or as some combination of male and female typical traits, what you find is that they tend to live perfectly normal lives. They don't have higher instances of mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually what you usually see is that in societies where there is heavy stigma against them, that is, for one reason or another, they're not accepted, they tend to be targets of violence, et cetera. Those kinds of things tend to predict mental health problems among those who are trans. So that's about as comprehensive of an answer I can give you before we get to that chapter. Does that help?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We'll talk about it. Well, it's complicated, but for now, I guess I'll leave you with the message that trans individuals are those whose identity, for one reason or another, does not necessarily match the sex that they were assigned at birth, or other aspects of kind of, I would say, their biological sexuality. That's probably the kind of clear-cut way to describe it. But it's not necessarily an abnormality, because they do occur in humans, in non-humans, cross-culturally. They're part of existence. Okay, so I want to kind of focus on a few things from the chapter, and I want to try to solicit specific discussion questions about some of these things. In terms of the structure of the female external genitalia, was there anything that was confusing, that you didn't understand, that you wanted to know more about? Was there anything that I said in the discussion specifically of external genitalia and kind of how the vulva is laid out, how the vagina is laid out, et cetera? Any questions related to that? Because even if you have, as we go over these external genitalia, even if you have a vulva or you have a penis, there's plenty you probably don't know about it.
My thing is with the hormones and the secretion, I've always had like a problem understanding how that all works. I understand like where it comes from and how it starts, but I don't get the FH and the LH and FSH. It's confusing.
Okay, so kind of focusing on the menstrual cycle. Yeah, the menstrual cycle is, I think, a mystery to a lot of people, even if you experience one. So, okay, based on lecture though, does anyone want to give me a good summary of how the menstrual cycle works? What are the different phases? What happens during each phase? Could you describe that? And this is just a general question for everybody. What do we know about it?
I know it's painful.
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
When it is, often what's happening is near the beginning of the menstrual cycle, one of the things that the body, so the very start of the menstrual cycle begins with what? What's the first thing that happens?
Isn't it like the shedding of the egg?
The,
Or is that
the
like that's part of the process?
No, the shedding. It's not necessarily, it's not the shedding of the egg though. What is shedding? So the very first thing is you get your period, which is what?
When like when you are prepared for like pregnancy, and then they say, oh, your egg hasn't attached to the wall. It's the wall shedding.
Yeah, it's that wall. What's that wall called? What's the term for the inside lining of the uterus?
Is it endometrium?
Endometrium, yes. So the very beginning of the menstrual cycle begins with the endometrium shedding off. Now it's kind of an arbitrary part. It's kind of weird because it's like something already exists and then the menstrual cycle begins. But that's how it is. So the very first menstrual cycle, the very first event is the wall of that endometrium is actually quite thick. It's very well developed because your body was preparing for pregnancy. Then when you're not, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. With that being said, like when you first start getting your cycle, what menarche, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Why, like, if that's your first time, then why? I don't understand. You haven't been prepared for pregnancy if you just reached puberty.
So it's not that you are going to, when your cycle begins, usually the part that actually really begins is that the body starts preparing, acting as if it were going to be pregnant. So clearly that first time you're probably not actually going to be pregnant. But what's going to happen is before that first instance of a period, you're going to be building up that endometrium anyway. And so yeah, the first time you have your period, technically there was some stuff that happened before that. This is why I say that getting your period is kind of a weird way to describe the start of the menstrual cycle, because it's a cycle. There's always something that happened beforehand. So the first time you get your period, menarche, you were building up the endometrium to some degree. However, excellent. Welcome, Hannah. The first time that you get your period, though, it might actually be it may not be as kind of intense, as heavy. And that's because it's getting going for the first time. There may not be a lot of built up endometrium there. And so it might be a relatively kind of mild flow at first, but of course everyone's different. Some people right out the gate, it's heavy for them. And that just means
I
there's
wanna
a lot to shut off. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no. I wanted to ask, is that where the hymen comes into place? Because I know some people get their period younger, and I think I read something about the hymen having to break or that causing the menstrual cycle to start. But what exactly happens if you haven't done any sexual intercourse? You just, is that hymen still intact? I guess, am I trying to say,
Yeah.
even if the cycle has started?
Yeah. So just so everyone knows, the hymen is that kind of barrier of flesh that is formed over the opening of the vaginal canal. That differs for everyone. For some people, it's closed. It's like completely closed off, and so nothing's getting in, nothing's getting out. Other people, it's a little further open. If that breaks for one reason or another, so it can break through sexual contact, and if it breaks, it's often bloody. I mean, you're tearing tissue, and that tissue has blood vessels in it.
Is that what? Hold on. Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah, go
interrupt. Isn't that? It's like a not technical term, but like people say like popping the cherry.
Yes,
Gotcha.
right. That's more related to kind of virginity. Popping the cherry, I think, it's kind of a gross way of just saying that someone had sex for the first time. But yes, that does kind of refer to that. The history is people used to use the breaking of the hymen as proof that someone was a virgin. So often the hymen will not break until someone either has sex or they had to put something they put something inside the vaginal canal such that it broke the hymen. This can actually happen when you get your period for the first time. So when you get your period for the first time, it could be that the flow helps to break the hymen because it is fairly delicate. Alternatively, what could happen is when you get your first period, then you put in a tampon. The tampon could actually break the hymen. And so someone could, say, be a virgin, they never have sex, but still their hymen breaks because they put a tampon in when they got the first period. Or there are also cases of people, say, like doing kind of intense activities like riding a bike. I mean, you're putting pressure down there and it doesn't take too much to break it. So that could break the hymen as well. The thing is, back in the day when women were not really allowed to do too much of anything, and especially within like royal society where they were kind of kept as treasures to be traded by, families and stuff, married off, etc., they probably weren't doing too much of anything. So if the hymen was broken, either that meant that they were out doing physical activity, which heaven forbid any kind of royal daughter do that, or they already had sex with someone. Back then, you kind of maintained that hymen very carefully so that when you had sex with your husband for the first time, that was proof that they were a virgin. There's some pretty weird rituals around that too, where a newlywed couple, they might actually have sex in a bed, the hymen breaks, they start to bleed, the blood gets on the sheets, and then they hold up the sheets publicly to show, hey, look, everybody, she was a virgin. It's confirmed now. And if you can't do that, then it's a mark of shame. I think thankfully we've gotten away from that practice, but that was practiced in several places for a long time. So yeah, the hymen has an opening that blood can come through when you menstruate. That's not true for everyone. Sometimes it's closed off, but usually it's first sexual intercourse or you use a tampon for the first time that ends up breaking the hymen. So because we're starting the menstrual cycle with the period, so the first kind of event is you're shedding off that endometrium. One way to look at this is the menstrual cycle is trying to start fresh. The whole point of the menstrual cycle is to prepare the body for pregnancy. So the first step is get rid of all the old material. We tried this once before. There was no pregnancy. Let's get rid of all of it. Let's bleed it all out, kind of slough it all off, start fresh. So at the very beginning, you actually don't have an influence of a lot of different hormones. A lot of the hormone concentrations are quite low. So the ones that we're thinking about are estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and then we also have these other pituitary hormones, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. At this stage, all the hormones are really low because the hormones don't really need to do much. However, Gonzalo, as you said, there can be some pain around this time. And the reason that there is pain is when you're trying to slough off that endometrium, the uterus has muscle in it. And that muscle, does anyone remember what the layer that is the muscular layer of the uterus is called? So the
Is it
endometrium.
the womb? Oh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
you said the muscular area of the uterus? It's not the womb, is it? It's just a,
The uterus is the womb. So the whole thing is called, yeah, uterus, womb, same thing. But so there's an endometrium, which is the inner layer, and then there's another layer in the middle. What was that one called?
Perineum, something like that.
That's the outside layer, the parametrium, the one that, so we're talking about the one in the middle, the thickest layer. That one is the myometrium, the myometrium. In biology, if you ever see the word myo, it means muscle. So this is the muscular wall of the uterus. So when you're having your period, that myometrium is actually contracting. That muscle is kind of contracting. It's pulling closer together to help dislodge the endometrium, to help push the endometrium out. So when you get cramps, when it's painful, what that is the muscle's working really hard. And just like you can kind of pull a muscle in your arm, sometimes when your myometrium is working hard, you can literally get cramps in the muscle, and then it's like, I hate that. So when it's painful, that's usually why it's painful. Okay, after the menstrual phase, so the menstrual phase is the first phase, that's when we slough off the endometrium. What happens next? What's the next phase called? And what's happening during that phase?
That's the follicular phase.
Good. So if the menstrual cycle is preparing us for pregnancy, how does the follicular phase prepare for pregnancy?
It's the phase where the ovarian follicle develops, and then also that is when the ovulation happens. It's like the second week of the cycle.
Good. So what is an ovarian follicle?
It's the egg.
It's an egg plus what else?
I don't remember that part.
No, you're good. You're good. Thank you.
The fluid that supports the egg. So like, what like gives it? I don't know. That's
Yes, perfect. It is the fluid that supports the egg. So within the ovaries, there are follicles, and the follicles are kind of these packets. The packets contain the egg, and then around it is a bunch of fluid. So throughout the follicular phase, it gets that name because the primary event is that you're developing a follicle. When a follicle develops, what does that mean? What's developing? What's changing about the follicle throughout the follicular phase?
it's getting bigger. Like it's
It's getting
growing.
bigger. Yeah, it's growing. It's getting bigger. You're actually producing more of that supporting fluid. The egg itself cannot really support itself. I mean, it has some stuff in it, but a lot of that stuff it wants to preserve for when conception occurs, when sperm meets it, because it's going to have to actually build an organism. So before that, the fluid within the follicle is there to help nourish it, support it. So it's going to build up that follicular fluid so that it has tons and tons of nutrients to make the journey that it needs to make. So throughout the follicular phase, you're going to see an increase in a number of hormones. First off, you're going to see an increase in follicle stimulating hormone. And that is, again, named after what it does. It starts to stimulate the development of that follicle. The other thing you're going to see is you're going to start to see an increase in estrogen as well. And estrogen does a number of things for the body, but for the purposes of sexual reproduction, what estrogen is going to do is, remember that, so estrogen is the hormone that is going to contribute to female typical traits, things like breast development and to some degree fat distribution throughout the body. So what you'll see is as a woman approaches kind of the center of the menstrual cycle, estrogen increases, and by virtue of that increasing, there are going to be certain physical traits that are slightly altered. That's the time of the month when you might actually feel the sexiest, you feel the best about yourself, you feel like your skin is just clear and glowing, you feel like your hips just kind of have that right kind of like flourish to them, that they're, you don't feel too lumpy, your fat just kind of feels, evenly distributed. It sounds silly, but there are you survey most women, they end up reporting that sometimes they kind of feel better about themselves, and specifically usually that coincides around the end of the follicular phase when estrogen is starting to spike. So the estrogen is kind of preparing the woman to certain traits, those female typical feminine traits that men would probably find attractive, tend to be kind of exaggerated. They're kind of supported by the presence of that estrogen. So, funnily enough, right around the time in which ovulation might occur, that is, the egg is actually released and then the woman can get pregnant, is when she is likely to be seen as most physically attractive by a potential sexual partner. So the idea is estrogen kind of prepares the body physically for that event of ovulation and therefore potential pregnancy. So estrogen starts to go up. Funnily enough, testosterone also starts to go up. Women also do create testosterone. It is the male typical hormone. It's what men predominantly have and what gives rise to deeper voice, body hair, etc. Easier accumulation of muscle mass. Well, women produce some amount of that, and what it seems to do is it peaks around ovulation, right at the end of that follicular phase, right when the woman would be ovulating and potentially could get pregnant. Well, what that testosterone does to some degree is it might actually increase the woman's sex drive, her interest in having sex with someone who she finds attractive. So the idea is the body, the menstrual cycle, through these different hormones, is preparing the woman not only to be potentially attractive to partners, but also herself be interested in having sex with someone she finds interesting. So these hormones are kind of coordinating this sexual behavior, this mating behavior. Again, women are not being controlled by their menstrual cycle, but if we think about subtle changes in a person's biology can influence kind of your mood, the decisions that you make, that's what we're talking about, these kind of subtle influences where maybe during ovulation, kind of near the end of this follicular phase, the center of the menstrual cycle, if you were confronted with the idea of, do you want to go out tonight? Do you want to go to a party? Do you want to go to a club? Do you want to, do you feel like dressing up and going out? What you find, they've done studies on this, is that women do tend to report greater interest in going out and socializing and dressing up and kind of making themselves look real good around that time when they are most likely to get pregnant, around that kind of spike in estrogen. So it's that difference between you're sitting there and going, do I feel like going out tonight? yeah, okay, I guess I could go. Or do I feel like going out tonight? Nah, I'm feeling I just want to stay inside and just kind of take care of myself. I don't really feel like doing anything. It's not that the menstrual cycle is causing you to do something, but it could influence how you make a decision about, what you do and whether you go out, et cetera, things like that, who you interact with, et cetera. So the follicular phase prepares for that. Then you get to the end of the follicular phase, and that is not exactly, but it is about 2 weeks after the start of a menstrual cycle. The whole thing is about 4 weeks, so halfway through, that is when that follicle that is developing with all of the fluid, it bursts, it ruptures, and then the egg comes out, supported by that fluid. And so around that time, what you see is that you have a spike in pretty much in estrogen, in follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone is what is responsible for that breaking event, for it rupturing and opening up. From there, the egg is going to survive for something like in the fallopian tubes for about 72 hours. It's really not long. It's actually kind of surprising that people get pregnant, because there's only this very small window where you can get pregnant. The idea is being more sexually receptive, being more interested in going out and meeting new people. That is really what's making it more likely, making it possible that someone would get pregnant in the first place, that you can actually get into that window of about 72 hours to find a partner to have sex with and then potentially have a child with. That's the follicle phase, the follicular phase. After ovulation, what does the body have to do? What's the next step in preparing the body for reproduction? The egg's out there. It might get fertilized by sperm. What does the body have to do?
Release hormones that support the pregnancy.
Yes. Release hormones that are going to support pregnancy. Very good. Yes. Around this time, you'll then start to see that estrogen falls off. You don't really need it anymore. You're still producing some of it, but the estrogen decreases substantially, because at this point, you're not really preparing the body to look good, to be sexually receptive, be proceptive, etc. Now the game is, well, the egg is out, it might get fertilized, and if it does, we want to make sure that the body is prepared to support it. At that point, what you see is that there's an increase in that other sex hormone, progesterone. If you ever want an easy way to remember what progesterone does, they both start with, so both progesterone and pregnancy start with PR, right? Progesterone prepares the body for pregnancy. At that point, progesterone starts to go up, and what progesterone is going to do, again, a number of things that it does, but in this case, it prepares the body by causing that endometrium to thicken up. So the endometrium kind of really reaches its thickest at that point. And progesterone is going to, there's some evidence that the amount of progesterone that's in your body at a given time will also start to motivate more kind of socially isolating behavior. If the body is now potentially pregnant, then the woman should be more motivated to actually protect her body, rather than kind of go out, do risky things, do things that are potentially fun. It could be that phase where kind of stay away from things that could be harmful to you, because whatever is harmful to you could potentially be harmful to the child. So there's kind of some motivation to kind of stay in, and this is we'll talk about birth control and what happens when certain types of birth control, you actually pump your body full of progesterone. And a lot of people do not like that, because what you're doing is basically simulating pregnancy for a long period of time. You're basically getting rid of your menstrual cycle by tricking your body into thinking that it's always pregnant. The problem is People then like to eat a lot. They might gain weight. They feel like they're not very attractive because the body's not really prioritizing that. The body thinks that it's getting ready to support a developing organism. So this phase afterwards, this is called the luteal phase. Progesterone starts to go up, the endometrium thickens in preparation for the fertilized egg to implant into the endometrium. So to lodge itself in there and then to be supported and eventually turn into an embryo, develop into a fetus, and eventually into a child. If the body does not get pregnant, now for that endometrium to stay there, the fertilized egg has to implant. It has to stay there. And if it's not implanted, then the body goes, oh, well, geez, we prepared for pregnancy, but nothing came of it. We didn't get pregnant this time, guys. So let's just slough it all off again. And that's when the next menstrual phase, the next menstrual phase begins. Body goes, well, we got to start all over again. Let's get rid of the endometrium. Let's bleed it all out. That's when you get your period. So that was a long answer to your question, Shakira, because how the hormones fluctuate, the logic there is these hormones are going to prepare your body for certain aspects of reproduction. Estrogen is something that kind of influences these outward physical characteristics and prepares the body for finding a good mate, attracting them and being attracted to them, and something that's going to prepare the body for pregnancy. So I recommend that you think about these hormones and when they happen throughout the menstrual cycle, in terms of what their function is. Why are you experiencing these spikes in hormones? What do they do, and why are they important? All right. Boy, time flies. Time flies when you're talking about the menstrual cycle. Other questions about the content from this section? Can you guys hear me now? Oh, okay, it is open. I will expect you to understand the menstrual cycle for the midterm. So if you have questions about this is going to be one of the things that absolutely 100% of the time I'm going to test on. I will expect you to understand each of the different phases, what happens in each phase, what different hormones do. You'll be asked to describe these things. But you'll also be asked about the general structure of women's external genitalia, and anything else that we covered in the lecture videos. All right. Okay. So next week, your term paper assignment number 3A is due. Those of you who arrived late, I did give instructions at the beginning of lecture about how to find primary sources for your paper. I will be uploading this video probably in about half an hour or so to Blackboard. Make sure that you watch that portion, just so that you know what to do for the paper. All right. Any questions, concerns? All right. Well, thank you all for being here. It's always a pleasure. And let me know if you have any troubles. All right. Take care, everybody.